Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anna Baggett, and I'm a planner in the Community Development Group here at ARC. Today's webinar, Breaking Barriers to Local Food Access, is a part of our weekly series hosted by ARC to share information and analysis, as well as best practices with local governments and regional leaders so that we can all make informed decisions during this unusual time. All webinars in this series, including recordings of past webinars and information on upcoming webinars, are posted to ARC's COVID-19 page, easily found from a pop-up bar on our homepage. Last week, I really enjoyed the teen ensemble from Dad's Garage take on regional issues with improv. If you missed it, I really encourage you to go back and watch it. Also, next week on October 13th, we will hear how WorkSource Atlanta Regional is helping the workforce navigate a new reality with COVID-19, high unemployment, and funding constraints. I'm sure many of you have attended one of our webinars in the past and know the drill with the GoToWebinar platform. However, I'm still going to go over some of the functionalities just in case we have some newcomers. So up on your screen, we've taken a screenshot of an attendee control panel. You should see something similar like this on your own screen in the upper right corner. Throughout the webinar, you will have the opportunity to submit text questions or comments by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You can also send your questions in at any time during the presentation, and we will be collecting these and addressing them throughout the Q&A session, excuse me, towards the end of the meeting. You also see chat messages from us in the window if we need to respond to your question in any way. One thing to note is that for our current meeting, all attendees have joined in listen-only mode. I'm sure you heard that at the very beginning. And so you will be on mute during today's meeting. But if you would like to speak during the Q&A period, you can raise your hand or make a comment in the chat box to let us know. You can also just type your questions and I will be the moderator and I can ask those questions myself. Another few quick notes before we begin our presentation. If you click away from our application to check an email, you might have trouble finding our meeting again. So look for either the blue flower petal icon on your ribbon bar at the bottom or side of your screen, or look in one of the open browser tabs. The orange colored arrow in the control panel for this software will collapse and open the control panel, and you can move it to another part of your screen if desired. Today's meeting and all of the other webinar series will be recorded through this platform, and the recording will be made available to all the meeting attendees in the follow-up email that we send out to you all. So let's begin. So before I introduce our great speakers today, I'm going to give you a brief rundown on ARC's involvement in food access planning. As you all know by now, ARC has many functions, and one of those functions is to encourage the development of healthy, livable communities. And that includes improving access to fresh and healthy food. Beyond that core function, we've identified a series of regional challenges through stakeholder meetings, workshops, committee meetings, and community surveys. And out of 8 regional challenges that we found through that process, one is access to healthy food. And finally, ARC develops and updates the Atlanta Region's plan, and that is a long-range blueprint that details investments needed to ensure Metro Atlanta's future success and improve the region's quality of life. As a part of this long-range plan, ARC developed a regional resource plan in tandem. So food access planning aligns with the adopted policy of creating and protecting space for local food production. So those are just a few reasons why we are involved in food access planning, but they're obviously anything to do with community development. Access to food is incredibly important to all of those functions. So was kind of the why we are involved in that work, but how are we involved in that work? ARC has a number of programs that address local food access, and these are just a few of them. We have a number of other programs that also deal with food access planning. One of them is the Community Development Assistance Program, or CDAP, and that program offers technical planning assistance to local governments, CIDs, and nonprofits. The program specifically aims to address those 8 regional priority issues that I mentioned earlier, one being access to local food. ARC has also partnered with Foodwell Alliance on a city agriculture planning program to plan and advocate for community gardens and urban farms in the community development strategies of metro Atlanta cities. You're going to hear a little bit more about that with Sarah Benedict from Foodwell Alliance later on in the presentation. And finally, a plug for something coming up pretty soon. ARC has also participated in the Atlanta Local Food Initiative since 2005. Each year, we open applications for free community orchards to schools and other community organizations. The application is open now, and more information should be included in the chat. And if it's not, just go ahead and visit fruittreesale.com. We support the orchard project through an annual fruit tree sale, so you'll find information on that same website about the fruit tree sale as well as the orchard project. In 2021, to respond to COVID, the sale will be all virtual, all online, so look out for that information as well in the coming months. And so now, to introduce our speakers, first up, we have Evan Daly, the Spanish coordinator for the Cooking Matters program at Open Hand Atlanta. He's going to talk to us about a food security assessment for the Latinx population along Buford Highway. This project receives support from both ARC's Community Development Assistance Program and SNAP-Ed. Rebecca Kiefer will also be talking about that same project. She is the Special Projects Manager from the City of Chamblee, and she will join him to answer any questions about the local government perspective of that project. And last but not least, we have Sarah Benedict, the Policy and Advocacy Manager from Foodwell Alliance, will discuss the East Point City Agriculture Plan. And this is Metro Atlanta's first city agriculture plan. So this is pretty exciting work. I have had the immense privilege to work directly with all of our panelists today. And let me just say, they are all fantastic. Both of these projects wrapped up during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they remain committed throughout the process. For each of these communities, food access was an issue before the pandemic. And as we all know, the pandemic exacerbated these issues as food insecurity increased throughout the country. So both of these projects will work to make these communities more food secure in the future. So moving on, we will hear from each speaker for about 20 minutes and then move to a brief Q&A period. At any point during the webinar, please send in your questions and we'll include them in the Q&A session. So let's switch it over to Evan.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Anna, thank you so much for that introduction. Let's see, trying to start the slideshow now. Okay, so as Anna mentioned, we received a lot of support from ARC through the Community Development Assistance Program. We also received a significant amount of support from the City of Chamblee. This project would not have been possible without their support, nor resources and financial support from SNAP-Ed Georgia and Open Hand. We're really excited to have you all here today because this project has been coming for a long time. It's been about a year from tip to tail, and we are really excited to conclude this, or to share the results of this formative evaluation of the food security status of the communities in the Buford Highway corridor. This is a formative evaluation of the food security status of the Hispanic and Latinx communities within that corridor. And as I'll talk about in a moment, we selected the Buford Highway corridor as basically a representative slice of the broadly dispersed and distributed communities around Atlanta. So back in the summer of 2018, I was talking with Director of Family Services at the Latin American Association, and they've been around providing key services such as SNAP enrollment and housing assistance within the Latinx community for decades. And she said to me that her community members were having trouble accessing food. And she went on to suggest that, maybe something like a SNAP doubling farmers market could help. So having just come off of a thesis, I wanted to get more answers around why she was saying these comments and what could be done about it. And so I kicked this idea around with some movers and shakers that I knew and within the team. And at the end of the day, we realized that there wasn't a lot that we knew about this in terms of food access and food security within the Hispanic and Latinx communities, especially that on Buford Highway. It just wasn't something that there was much data around. So I looked for the resources that we have, and from the Census Bureau, I found that over the last 20 years, between 2000 and 2017, this community has more than doubled. What was just under 200,000 person strong community in the year 2000 has grown to over 500,000 in 2017. And as more information becomes available with this next census, we'll have more information. But the trend for the last 20 or so years has been that this is one of Atlanta's fastest growing communities. So the fact that there was this blind spot spoke deeply to ARC and their interests to gain more information about food access for all communities. And is this really a discussion about food access or food security? Well, the United Nations Committee on Food Security really defined that concept very succinctly by saying it's the condition in which all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. And there's a lot to unpack there, but functionally, there are 4 key considerations that we can ascertain from that when talking about food security. And access is like right at the top. And that's essentially a physical and financial consideration in terms of distance and economic standing about affording food. There's also the question of availability. Is the food available in a community culturally relevant? Is it nutritious and stocked? Looking at utility, is it something that a community can use? Is it safe for them to eat? And finally, do those other considerations remain stable over time? So functionally, those were kind of the aspects that we looked at through when we developed the lens for this formative evaluation. And to assess all of that, we needed a little bit more than just GIS mapping or a demographic analysis alone. So we decided to do a mixed methods assessment, combining quantitative hard data with qualitative context-heavy community feedback to really develop a holistic image of the status. So the GIS mapping included a food landscape inventory and a network analysis, and as well as the demographic analysis. Those were both done by ARC through the CDAP process. We also undertook a community member survey and a nutrition environment measures survey, looking at the quantitative side of the discussion. And that nutrition environment measures survey is essentially a process that involves going into supermarkets and looking for what is there and taking a short assessment of what is in stock and the quality and diversity. So really looking at that availability quadrant. The qualitative analysis looked at focus group discussions and stakeholder interviews as well. As I mentioned, we wanted to do a case study to really kind of contain this research project, because there are many communities throughout Atlanta where we could have focused on, and including all of them would have made 10 times as much work as we had the resources for. So this is really a really great starting point, but this was the scope of our research. We also had a lot of key partners in this area, like the City of Chamblee, Mercy Care, which is a healthcare provider, the City of Brookhaven, and the Latin American Association, which is also known as the LAA in the bottom left. Through the demographic analysis, we determined that this highlighted area was 54% Hispanic as well, which is significant. And we realized that we're listening to the feedback properly at that point. The demographic findings, 5 of the key outcomes that we identified from this are listed here. And we can see that just over a quarter of the case study area community is living below the poverty line at 26%, 26.4%, which is higher, which is 10% above the 10 county average, 10 county result. Over 50% of renters are housing cost burdened, as compared to 43% more or less for the 10 county area. And that housing cost burden is determined by households that are spending more, equal to or more than 30% of their income on housing costs like rent. The unemployment rate is lower in this case study area than the 10 county area by a decent amount. And the median household income is also significantly lower at $53,000 as opposed to almost $68,000. And very interestingly as well, you'll see in the bottom left that over 50% of the members of this community speak English either what is defined as not well or not at all. And let's add some context to that through the built environment. So the GIS food landscape mapping results indicate that, as you'll see in this map on the right, that it's a very dense food environment with a lot of focus along the Buford Highway corridor itself, kind of that main gray vein that runs through the middle of that teal area. And it's full of restaurants, large supermarkets, small grocery stores. It has a lot, and it's all very dense. But some of the supermarkets are pretty distributed, and in a moment we'll see how accessible they are. But there's also a lot of fast food restaurants, with 59 in the corridor and 79 large supermarkets, as well as 53 small grocery stores. This is a snapshot from the network analysis undertaken by ARC. And what we have here are all of the grocery stores that are represented by white dots and sidewalk data. Now, essentially, the darker the blue shading, the closer, the less walking time people will see while walking from a home of residence to a supermarket or a small grocery store. Now, there are also what we can see as many patches in availability of data, but also especially in residential areas where there just aren't many sidewalks that can promote that pedestrian connectivity. And in some cases, that walk time just kind of stops at 5 minutes, because that's sometimes where the sidewalks just stop. So that was a very interesting finding, especially in a community that has pretty decently high rates of, or low rather, rates of car ownership. Now, we also administered a paper survey. This was administered in the focus group discussion. So We had about 25 respondents there. And two of the questions we asked in this survey were two of the USDA's food security screening questions. Here we see one of them, but they were both very close in their results, with almost no difference between them at all, really. This one asks participants to respond to the prompt. In the last 12 months, I was worried whether our food would run out before we got money to buy more. And the responses suggested are the four you see in front of you, being rarely, don't know, frequently, and sometimes. And we were surprised to see that 60% responded sometimes to this, and about 63% responded sometimes to the other question, which then indicates a low level of food security. And we undertook a focus group discussion to add context to this. So, excuse me, the participants really commented a lot on many factors which are influencing their food seeking decisions. And that was great because that was the exact focus of the discussion. That was the driving theme of making the questions and guiding it. So we were really happy to see that it was received so well and so organically. There was a lot of focus on food resources, especially around money and transportation. Some participants commented about preferring to go grocery shopping at one store, but couldn't because it was too far away. Food preferences and culinary traditions really rose to the top of a lot of considerations. A lot of the participants commented a lot frequently about very unique dishes from like Venezuela and Guatemala that you wouldn't normally find here, but are intrinsic to cultural traditions and are very important to them. A lot of existing chronic health considerations really influenced that food decision-making process. Health considerations like diabetes and high blood pressure were really front of mind for a lot of participants, and they were very aware of them. And that influenced the food that they bought. And there was also a lot of interest in community gardening as well. And a lot of community members were really excited about opportunities to engage with that because their current living conditions or status for their residents wasn't really the most conducive for that because of the apartments they were living in, for example. We haven't had the opportunity to explore all of the results from this research in depth because of the time limitations for today, but the program management team really put their heads together and included all of the results to inform the recommendations that we've made for this project. And we have 5 key categories that have been made through this process. We have the first 3 on this page and the last 2 on the next page. And the first one is food access policy and programming. And this could include something like land use and development incentives for healthy food uses. We interviewed businesses along the corridor that were interested in engaging with this as more information became available. Another recommendation category is community and home gardening. One step that could be taken in this direction is reviewing codes and ordinances to identify barriers to community gardens, especially because of the interest expressed by the community members. The third one is transportation and pedestrian infrastructure. As we saw with the GIS analysis, we've taken an initial step in working to identify pedestrian infrastructure improvement opportunities, and there could be more steps taken in that direction based on what the project management team saw from that work. The fourth category is housing affordability based on the demographic analysis and some trends in the area. An assessment of housing affordability and exploring related policies could be beneficial. And finally, looking into education and outreach. For example, Spanish-speaking outreach programs to promote community member participation could be really, really fruitful. One question that we closed the focus group discussion out that I want to leave with us today is I posed to community members based on the hour-long discussion around their food preferences and food access and challenges they experience with that. I asked what role did they see municipalities and community development organizations playing in that. And part of me was expecting some level of active engagement, and a couple of the community members just kind of brushed it off and didn't really engage with it and didn't see much of a role there. One of them just said no, point blank. So I think that based on what we've seen, some education and outreach around those kinds of programs and efforts to promote community participation in that process could be really helpful in the future. Okay, thank you so much.
Hey, Evan, thank you. We're going to take this time to ask a couple of questions in advance of our larger Q&A session later. So Rebecca, if you are on, can you also unmute yourself if possible? Hey, Rebecca. So Rebecca, working with the city of Chamblee, can you describe what Chamblee's role in this project was, and why did they want to be in this study, and some things of those nature? I think you're still muted, Rebecca.
I was muted in 2 places. Okay, so it happened kind of organically. I think I was participating in an ARC event and happened to be talking to some folks at ARC and got connected to Evan, and that's when we decided to team up and pursue the CDAP funding. But we had aspirations of kind of understanding food security, and so that kind of was the jumpstart that we needed. This community is probably one that traditionally fears governmental processes, and so we've had definitely a hard time reaching them and getting them to participate. And one thing that we wanted, in addition to the information, in addition to understanding what the food security issues are, was also an opportunity to understand the community better and get to know the leaders and build a rapport with some of the leaders in the community.
Okay, thank you. And Rebecca, I have one more question. So what was different about this project than other planning projects you've worked on in the past?
I'd say for one, the partners and just the general setup of the project, with it being a CDAP project, it just kind of the way we worked with ARC essentially being, serving almost a consultant role. So I'd say that was different from the get-go. And working with Evan, it's not often on, planning projects that we work with nonprofits as kind of, Evan was essentially leading the entire project. And so as a result of that, also the methodology. So the type of data and how we collected it was kind of foreign to me as a planner. And so, I think some of the things that he mentioned that he did, like the food landscape and network analysis, were definitely different than, the typical demographic analysis, stakeholder interviews. So that was definitely new and different, and something that we definitely learned from.
And I just want to add really quickly, we were really excited to be in such deep collaboration with ARC and Chamblee around this, because we've undertaken this work to really inform our plans in developing some interventions with the Latinx community, with our partnership with the state SNAP Ed organization and Open Hand in general.
Great. And Evan, you kind of touched on the next question that I have for you. As planners, we're typically used to a common set of stakeholders, but this time around, we really worked with some folks in the public health sphere, and you kind of have to do that with food access. So can you talk a little bit more about, who we involved in the stakeholder process?
Definitely. So some of the key partners beyond the ARC and Chambly also included Mercy Care. Early on, they were key in helping us kind of get a feel for where the community members were at in terms of food security based on some proxy indicators like income and insurance rates, and some anecdotal information, as well as the Latin American Association, which really started the whole conversation. The Common Market was also involved with this project, and they're a local food distributor. And they were really also provided some really interesting insights into food security from that food distributor perspective.
Good, great. So now I believe we're going to move on to Sarah Benedict. She's got a presentation related to the East Point City Agriculture Plan. And if you have any more questions for Rebecca or Evan, this is not the last time to ask them. We will ask more questions during the Q&A session.
All right. Hey everyone, I am Sarah Benedict, the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Foodwell Alliance, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to join you today to talk a little bit about our City Agriculture Plan initiative and its potential for improving food access in the city of East Point. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, I wanted to provide just a little bit of background on Foodwell Alliance. We're a collaborative network of local leaders working to support those building thriving community gardens and farms across Metro Atlanta. And we were founded in 2015 out of the vision of Bill Bowling and Jim Kennedy, and have been able to continue this work since then with the generous support of the James M. Cox Foundation, and for this project specifically from the Zeist Foundation as well. So we do our work in three main ways: by collaborating with the growers themselves. So our resource center team provides funding through traditional grant making and direct resources, including compost, volunteers, seedlings, etc., to really build a supportive ecosystem for our network of gardens and farms to thrive. And then our events and experiences team creates opportunities for people to connect to where their food comes from and to form relationships with those who grow it. And our newest avenue of engagement is with local governments. So over the first 5 or so years of our work with the urban agriculture community, we discovered that one of the major barriers to their success was a lack of power and participation in the development of their cities. So to that end, we made a conscious effort to begin working with local governments to develop inclusive policies that would prioritize gardens and farms as our region continues to grow so quickly. We really believe that cities that prioritize urban ag in their development will see many benefits, from economic resiliency, more equitable access to local food, improved health outcomes for their residents, and strengthened local ecosystems. So as we began to develop the city agriculture plan process, which was really our first policy-based initiative and the region's first plan of its kind, really, we knew that we'd be most effective if we could build on the talents of established local leaders who were already doing both in-community work and who are experts in planning. So we contracted with Taproot Consulting to lead our community asset mapping process, and then we partnered with ARC to lead the actual planning process itself in phase 2. So we got this program up and running in the fall of 2018 when we put out a call to all 54 cities in our 5-county area to develop a city agriculture plan for their community. And we received applications from 7 cities. That was Lawrenceville, Lovejoy, Pine Lake, Hapeville, Clarkston, Alpharetta, and of course, East Point. And we led community food forums in each of those cities to gauge community interest in the plan. And ultimately, in the summer of 2019, we selected East Point due to a couple of main factors. They had a really high level of community engagement. They had dedicated city staff who have helped us immensely to shepherd this process through municipal channels. And they had a diverse number of food and ag organizations that were based in East Point, who we knew could kind of connect and leverage the plan resources as we move forward. So one new element that Foodwell Alliance specifically brought to ARC's planning process was an extensive community engagement phase prior to developing the plan. So this phase took place from August to December of 2019, and it involved lots of in-community work and events. And the addition of this component was really important to us for several reasons. We wanted to ensure that all the recommendations of the plan were rooted in community priorities and would efficiently build off of all the community assets that were already present in East Point. So in addition to the community asset mapping work that was being done through Taproot, Foodwell Alliance held several events to engage East Point residents in the process and to get them thinking about the food and ag work happening within their community. So in August, we held an event for over 100 residents to kick off the city ag plan process. We broke residents out into small working groups, and they had discussions and identified community assets on our big maps that you see here. Then in October, we led a 6-stop bus tour for another 50 residents, and we brought them directly to the farms and food organizations in East Point to give them the opportunity to hear directly from their local leaders. So we began at the Habasha Garden at Arts Exchange, which is the photo you see here. We went to Truly Living Well, Soul Spirit Farms, the East Point Farmers Market, Compost Now, and Common Market. Then in November, we actually received applications from residents who were interested in serving on the plan steering committee, and we held a kind of pitch night where 3 of the committee members were directly elected by community residents. So from their ongoing work through all of that, all of the events that were going on, Taproot produced a final community asset mapping report with lots of qualitative data from the community, and they condensed their feedback into 7 main priorities for city ag planning in East Point. The first of which was to improve food security and health outcomes. So East Point had a little bit of a leg up on this. Their mayor, Mayor Ingram, has been a champion of healthy lifestyles for several years now, leading the Healthy Point initiative that's been aimed at creating multi-generational, community-focused activities to promote health. But a lot of the residents that we heard from wanted to expand on that work and ensure more diversified access to healthy food options. So at one of our focus groups, a resident was quoted as saying, "What the city does know and understand is that we are in a food desert. It's hard to find choices of foods that are healthy and reasonably priced. And that has nothing to do with the people willing to buy the food. We can't get big distributors here. They used to say the demographics wouldn't support their stores. When you go to the stores we do have in East Point, you won't find quality produce unless you go all the way to Publix, then it's a long, hard walk, or the bus, and they're expensive." So this priority in particular really became a guiding force, but all 7 of these priorities would go on to directly shape the planning process. So our last step before we actually began to plan was to fill the rest of the steering committee positions. So in addition to the 3 community elected delegates that we had from the November event, the mayor and council members each selected committee members, and then 4 city staff were appointed to serve as well. So this steering committee was in particular, weighted much more heavily towards subject matter experts and community leaders than the typical city staff makeup of other more traditional ARC planning processes. And this, presented some of its own unique challenges, but it also ensured that community voices and priorities really formed the backbone of the plan. So ARC led the steering committee in 7 monthly meetings from January through July of this year. The meetings were focused around these 5 priorities, which were gleaned from the community asset mapping results. And then the committee worked to develop ongoing short-term and long-term recommendations for each of the priorities. So in keeping with the theme of this webinar, I'll focus today on priority A, which is improving local food access, but I would be happy to discuss any of the other plan recommendations in detail if anyone wants to reach out afterwards. So this set of recommendations was not only grounded in the community feedback that we got, but also in data from the US Census, stating that 91% of East Point residents live in a USDA designated low-income, low-access census tract. The data also shows that many residents lack access to a car, which provides another significant barrier to accessing fresh, healthy food from limited points of sale within the city. So there's several recommendations here. First, leveraging outside partnerships to increase opportunities for school kids in East Point, including joining the National Farm to School Initiative through the existing partner of Fulton County Schools, sponsoring programming with the UGA Extension Office, which is located right in East Point, and partnering with the Greening Youth Foundation to develop environmental education curricula. Next, the East Point Farmers Market and Market 166, which is an East Point-based grocery and kitchen co-op in its early stages of development, have partnered to create an idea for a mobile farmers market to address the existing food insecurity that's only been exacerbated by the COVID situation. This initiative still needs funding for an outfitted vehicle, and some of the zoning ordinances in East Point are going to need to be adjusted so that a mobile market would be able to service residential areas. Thirdly, we want to encourage home gardening to increase food security. The city has already been partnering with Foodwell Alliance to help distribute bucket gardens or container gardens to lots of eager community members who are all looking for opportunities to grow their own food. And this initiative is actually already being continued by the steering committee, who are distributing another 200 container gardens tomorrow at the East Point Farmers Market. But it could be expanded with more city support, more financial support, and then further strengthened by pairing those giveaways with gardening classes and resources to help ensure resident success, as many of them are beginning gardeners. Also recommended is developing a healthy corner store incentive program. So East Point has a population of 35,000 people and is home to only 2 conventional supermarkets, a Wayfield Foods and a Piggly Wiggly. In comparison, there are 25 convenience stores throughout the city. So developing an incentive program for corner stores to carry local produce would not only provide residents with easier access to fresh options, but also provide market opportunities for urban growers. And then longer term, the goal, which is already being pursued by groups like Market 166, should be to support the creation of a full service grocery store dedicated to sourcing locally and providing healthy options for the community. So beyond directly improving local food access, the plan also includes numerous recommendations for the following priorities that I'm going to run through, all of which are really interconnected and would ultimately contribute to sustainable and diversified local food options. So these include supporting local urban growers through economic development incentive programs like institutional or restaurant procurement goals, providing utility variances to lower costs, and providing databases and opportunities to access resources to equip new gardeners and farmers. It's also going to be key to establish the role of local government and leaders. So first recommendation on this list is to transition existing steering committee members into an urban agriculture collective to act as a liaison and coordinate with dedicated city staff. We also want to include urban agriculture priorities into East Point's upcoming zoning ordinance rewrite, which we know is coming in the next couple of months. And then we want to leverage public land for growing space. And thinking about ensuring the sustainability of these recommendations, environmentally resilient practices like centralized composting, a seed bank, or pollinator protection strategies will also need to be prioritized. And then finally, once many of the projects within these recommendations have been successfully carried out, we want to ensure that East Point serves as a model for other cities in the region. So like Hapeville has branded itself as a home for the arts, part of East Point city branding can be as a local food destination. So what are our next steps for the plan? First, we need to move it through the upcoming Planning Commission and City Council meetings. And then once approved, this is going to be adopted as an amendment to East Point's comprehensive plan, which we feel is really going to ensure the prioritization of these recommendations for years to come. We'll then move into implementation, finally. That's when we'll carry out specific projects, one of which, as mentioned, will be creating that urban agriculture collective, who are really planning to take the lead on executing the projects and continuing with community engagement. And that implementation will be funded by a $75,000 grant from Foodwell Alliance, which will be matched with an equal amount of in-kind resources from the city. And then we recently also learned that we were awarded a regional food systems partnerships grant through USDA. So with all of those commitments, we're really confident that we can make a real and lasting impact in East Point. We can increase local food access, and we can cultivate a thriving urban agriculture ecosystem throughout the city.
So if you would hold on for just a moment to do a couple of specific questions related to this presentation, then we will move into our Q&A panel. So we are still looking for additional questions. We have some great ones that we will ask, but after seeing both of those presentations, it would be great if you go into the questions panel and submit any questions you have for our panelists for our Q&A session. So Sarah, before you move on, so one of the questions that I had for you, let me find them. So I know from experience that this planning process also coincided with COVID-19. How did the planning process change in response to the pandemic, as well as, you know, did people lose motivation? You know, what was kind of the feeling around that event?
Yeah, so when COVID really hit in force in March, we had held 2 meetings with the steering committee and really just getting into our stride in the planning process. And then, of course, we had to switch over to planning virtually over Zoom, which is always a little less organic, harder to elicit input from everyone. It also, I mean, it shifted the priorities of the city and community members. You know, the economic impacts of COVID resonated through East Point just as they did everywhere else. And I think there was this general feeling of we need immediate action to address rising food insecurity rather than long-term planning. And while I definitely understood that, I didn't see it as an either or situation, because yes, the residents had new immediate needs, and the city really did step up to provide food assistance through several other programs that they're running. But continuing to develop long-term plans for a stable, diversified, community-led urban ag system within the community will ultimately improve the resiliency of East Point to respond to future situations that might have similar effects.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that response. So I think we're going to now shift into our Q&A panel. So if our other panelists can rejoin the conversation via video, that would be great. So everybody doesn't have to see my face by itself. Great. So again, for the audience members, if you have any questions for our panelists, we will be asking them now. So be sure to submit them if possible. So I think, Sarah, we've got a couple more for you. So one of them is, in addition to the corner store incentive program, did the steering committee consider reaching out to existing stores like Wayfield to sell local produce?
You know, to my knowledge, not yet. We have had the privilege of having one of the Market 166 board members serve on the steering committee. So we've really been focused around promoting the advancement of their initiative, and then you know, sort of lower hanging fruit options to increase food access through those corner stores rather than addressing national chains. But it's a good suggestion, and yeah, we definitely should reach out to them as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you know, since the Urban Agriculture Collective will be moving forward as this entity and just kind of exploring other options in addition to what is laid out into the plan, that's definitely something that I think is flexible. So you make a good point. So let me see what other question. Oh, now they're rolling in. I think Evan and Rebecca, a similar question that I asked Sarah is kind of how did the planning process and just the research process kind of change in the wake of COVID-19? Because it was kind of towards the tail end of the project, but what effects did the pandemic have on the project?
Well, as you mentioned, this pandemic really kicked into a new gear as the research project was in its final stages. Unfortunately, those final stages were the most community focused and involved. And we had a second focus group planned that, you know, like a week after the official statewide stay-at-home order was administered. It was scheduled in that same week, and that was completely called off, and everything shifted and scaled back to adapt to those social distancing guidelines, and it moved to a much more bird's eye view perspective for that analysis, for that phase of the analysis.
Thank you. Rebecca, did you want to add anything?
You know, just that I think missing out on that focus group, some of the I think richest information that we got was from the first focus group. So, you know, that was definitely, you know, disappointing, but I think, you know, Evan and his team were able to pivot and produce something really useful and, you know, working with the data that he had.
Thank you. Let's see, we've got some more questions. So Sarah, you mentioned that the plan will be integrated into East Point's comprehensive plan. Do you know if it will tie in with the existing priorities and goals already in the comprehensive plan?
You know, I think that's something that we're going to address as this plan moves through the Planning Commission and City Council processes. And Anna, as the lead planner on the project from the ARC side, you probably have a little more insight into that side of it. You know, I think to make any plan sustainable, it needs to be obviously integrated with existing planning processes. So I'm hoping that there is as much overlap as possible. But that will kind of remain to be seen, the extent of that, as we move through the municipal channels.
Yeah, you did mention that. I probably know more, but as far as East Point's current comprehensive plan goes, I do believe local food and access to food was indicated as a community priority. So I would say that this kind of acts as kind of a follow-up to that priority within the comprehensive plan and kind of expands on it a little bit more. So I don't foresee it working against the comprehensive plan at all. If anything, it is integrated in some respect. And like Sarah said, we're moving into the planning commission phase of a plan adoption process. So they will be able to tell us if it's not well integrated. Okay. Oh, we got some more questions. Great. So So Rebecca, kind of following up on plan adoption processes, how do you think Chambly will start implementing some of the recommendations listed in the food security assessment?
Great question. So that was the really exciting part for me, one, because it was just the part that I was most familiar with in the process, but being able to take, from the focus group and the other data, the things that people were saying were needs, barriers to food access. We were able to translate those into recommendations. And so in the action plans, a really great set of recommendations that will, start implementing, upon adoption. We're going to be adopting the plan at the October City Council meeting and be able to start, moving forward with those plans. Some of the, things that I'm excited about, you've got more traditional, access to community gardens very close to the corridor. There already is a community garden, but it's fairly new, but it's really underutilized. And, so definitely targeting some of, the marketing toward the community and also maybe some of the programming, but even things that came out of it as far as, physical activity and just general health of the community. And so looking at parks and recreation programming that is geared toward the Latinx community.
Great, thank you. So this next question is kind of for all three of our panelists. So both of these projects were pilot projects to study something that hasn't really been studied before or planned for before in the area. So I missed the question. What is something that you wish you knew before this pilot experience and before starting the process that you might for the next, if you're involved in something similar, you might apply to the next process?
I would like to lead with an example. About 3 weeks ago, I connected with somebody at the Latin American Association, and they mentioned that they had shifted their entire platform online. And this is an organization that has been in the community almost every day of the week for the last 30 plus years. And for them to make that pivot to continue to provide resources and educational materials to their constituents is huge. And a little while ago, somebody on a listserv asked the question, what do virtual focus groups look and feel like? And what kind of functionality is there? And possibly looking at making that transition and pivot to a virtual focus group earlier on, and maybe even just having that kind of conversation could have been really interesting to look at, to really get that additional perspective from their community members in this work.
Great. Rebecca or Sarah?
I think that's a great observation, learning how to do this kind of planning work virtually. I feel like, kind of ironically, one of my biggest learnings from this pilot process is that not much can be replicated or directly carried over to a future similar process. You know, over the course of this plan, we had staffing changes in project leadership at both ARC and Foodwell, obviously the complications due to the COVID-19 situation. I think the general factors that I had mentioned that led to East Point's success will definitely hold true for future cities. Like, you need a committed citizen base and city staff, as well as some leaders with knowledge of local food and urban ag issues. But I think the most important factor that's going to contribute to the success of the plan is that it's so specifically tailored to East Point. You know, we created the plan around community and city priorities to directly address East Point specific goals and challenges. And that's really what I want to carry forward over to the next process, is a commitment to learning directly from the community and presenting realistic solutions and strategies for them specifically.
And to add to that, I would say the relationships, like I said, was one of the priorities early on. I mean, just the relationship building that we've done through this process has given us, you know, volunteer opportunities, and then also has kicked off additional projects just with making connections to the Latin American Association and groups like that.
Great. So another thing is, this is a bit more of a broad question, but if a community was wanting to start a conversation around food access and even local food access, how would you suggest they start that conversation? And this is also for everybody. I think Evan wants to go first.
I wanted to offer the opportunity for anybody else.
I can take a stab at that one. I think, you know, what was really useful in starting this process was to begin with community asset mapping. So to have a solid understanding of what already exists within the community, so that when you are having those conversations about challenges your community is facing or needs moving forward, it's grounded in what already exists, and, you know, no one's recreating the wheel or negating the fact that more often than not there are local champions around any issue, but especially food access within your community that are already working on these issues.
Yeah, and what I think I would like to add on to that as well, because I think that the successful outcomes that we've been able to produce through this research have really been reinforced by the diversity of our stakeholder group. So one of the things that I think was really important in the initial steps of this process was talking to people like Rebecca and their city planning efforts, talking to nonprofit individuals and talking to community members and talking to businesses alike to gain that variety of perspectives to understand how those assets in the community work independently and together.
Rebecca, from a local government perspective, how would you suggest if a city planner organization or city council is concerned about food access, how would you, from a local government perspective, approach that conversation?
I mean, absolutely working with a nonprofit where, you know, that's a lot of what they do, I think is critical, just because there are, like Evan said, there are perspectives that we did not bring to the table that either he had or someone on his team had, or he knew a partner who did. So I think understanding, you know, your strengths and what you do know, and then bringing people to the table who have complementary strengths and experience.
Great, yeah. So this next question is for both Sarah and Rebecca. How does zoning play a role in allowing local agriculture? Both projects had recommendations related to that.
So a lot of the recommendations on our end came out of some of the commentary that, a property manager didn't allow containers to be able to plant their own vegetables that would support food security. So we're looking at, what are our ways in the zoning ordinance that we can encourage that, that we can explicitly allow things like that. And of course, private property can, have their own restrictions, but at least to explicitly allow those kinds of things from a zoning ordinance standpoint, and then from a policy and advocacy standpoint, find out what are the reasons that some of those restrictions are in place, and can we help break down some of those barriers, things like that. Comes to mind. I'll let Sarah speak. And
yeah, I think a lot of the zoning issues that we came across as barriers were mostly in contrast to like entrepreneurial activities. So like a mobile market is not allowed to go through residential areas, nor is a food truck that might have local options. You may be limited in your ability to hold sales from a food stand on your property if you're, you have a backyard garden or a community garden. And I think it's important, as Rebecca said, to understand the motivation behind those limitations. So yes, we don't want, every person in their home like selling things in their front yard every day, but can we make exceptions or variances for those that are directly benefiting the community? And so one of our recommendations is, of course, to try and incorporate those urban agriculture priorities into the zoning ordinance rewrite, and just take advantage of opportunities like that when there's a rewrite or a revision on the schedule to, incorporate suggestions from the community in terms of barriers that they've faced when coming across zoning issues.
Yeah. And it's even, access. So we talked about the sidewalk inventory that we did. So making sure, developments contribute to the sidewalk network, and even, your land use policy, what supports, healthy food stores, and, maybe limiting some of the unhealthy food options, as far as land use permits. So that's what we're looking at a lot in amending our unified development ordinance.
Great, that's all super helpful information. So those are all of our questions. We have some more specific questions that we will respond to later via chat. But thank you once again to all of our speakers for sharing this critical information. We really appreciate it, and I know everyone has gained some insight from these discussions. As we bring this webinar to a close, if you have any additional questions, or if you're interested in a specific topic for a future webinar, please let us know and reach out to us. We're always looking for new ideas, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. Again, you will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to access the recording of this webinar. And on behalf of the Atlanta Regional Commission and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great day. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.